Awesome. All right, so that kicks us off. So where we're going to pick up is on page 159. And we're going to be starting at the very bottom paragraph of page 159. And welcome all that have joined us. And so again, I'm not going to do the whole recap like I did the last few weeks, but just a quick recap of what we're talking about in A Vision for You. We're talking about the history of how Alcoholics Anonymous began to grow with one alcoholic helping another. And that is the vision that is being shared for us, helping another person who has suffered in the way that we have suffered, and that fellowship that grows up among us. And so we're reading last week the story about the first 4 sober members and what happened to them. And we're talking a lot about AA number 3, spent some time on Ernie Galbraith, our devil may care chap. And yes, I can definitely put that. I can put that in the chat at the end of the study if no one gets it there first. So, all right. So, very bottom paragraph. So now it's talking about the early growth and what early Alcoholics Anonymous, early 12-step, early meetings looked like. It says a year and 6 months later, that's a year and a half, these 3 had succeeded with 7 more. Seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women, happy in their release and constantly thinking of how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. And what I want to point out there is, of course, happy in our release. I mean, it is an incredible, wonderful, wonderful thing to be freed of the mental obsession, that insane thought that takes me back time and time again to the inevitable torture of the physical allergy. It's an incredible thing to be free from that selfishness, that self-centeredness, not perfectly. I gotta work on that, seeking God's will, but it's an incredible, wonderful thing. But what do we know? I mean, if we go to meetings where they have topics, quite regularly, what is a topic that's at a topic meeting? Gratitude. It's almost always gratitude. And then we got to find people to help clean up after the meeting. You know what I mean? And maybe you guys' meetings are more spiritual and you don't have that happen. But it is wonderful to have gratitude, and wonderful for the appreciation of a gift that I know I didn't earn and I know I didn't deserve. But that happy in their release and constantly thinking of how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. I have the joy, I have the freedom, I have the gratitude, and my thought life is on the lines of how can I help others. In fact, on page 20, if you're writing in your book and wanting to make a note, you can make a note to page 20, because in page 20 it says our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So, of course, I'm thinking about how I can help others, because it is incredible the way in which I have been helped. And the most sure sign of a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening, is the desire to pass it on to somebody else. But also because my life depends on it. It says, in addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. And what I want to point out is that this is a way of life. And so if you've been coming from the very beginning, you know I've been emphasizing way of life, way of life, way of life. That this isn't a set it and forget it program. We've had talks about how this isn't crock pot sobriety, it's stir fry. You know what I mean? I can't set it and forget it. I got to be working it every day. And welcome, we're on page 60 for those that just joined. And so it says, aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object. So this is telling us what the main purpose of meetings are. What is the main purpose for a meeting? It's this. The prime object was to provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems. And so when new people are bringing their problems, what are their problems? I mean, of course, I don't know about you guys. Maybe you guys were more spiritual when you were new. I was like, listen, I got problems. I got relationship problems. I got money problems. I got housing problems. I got problems. Your face, look at me. That's a problems, right? I showed up with problems, but what is the real problem that I had? It's a lack of control and a lack of choice, the mental obsession and the physical allergy. And so as a recovered member, what's my responsibility? Well, to show up at the meeting with a solution to those new members who come with their problem. And of course, what do we all know is from experience, when I work this program, this way of life, and I experience the solution that's on offer, I don't got a lot of those other problems anymore. You know what I'm saying? And in fact, actually in Bill's story, Ebby shares with Bill that this is a way of life which answers all our problems. All. So even those other ones that I thought, no, couldn't be my alcoholism. It's got to be those things. Yeah, even some of those things too. So it says outsiders became interested. One man and his wife placed their large home at the disposal of this strangely assorted crowd. And it's T. Henry and Clarence Williams. And they were in Akron, Ohio. And the address, for those that are really nerdy, just like me, the address was 676 Palisades Drive. And Rob, if you look over his shoulder, you can see their home behind him. But also Rob was kind enough to share with me some of the pictures he had of this place. And so I should be able to screen share them. I mean, no promises. We'll see if this works. All right. And so that's a color photo of what this house looks like. And T. Henry and Clarence Williams, they were members of the Oxford group. And they would invite people into their homes to have these Oxford group meetings. And then, let me see if did that work? Awesome. And so that's the picture that's right behind Rob, and we can kind of see what it looked like a little bit kind of closer to that time. And this is the living room, or the room where they'd be meeting to have their meetings. And Rob was like, imagine 30 people crammed in there, and they're all smoking, so you can see none of them, right? But that's what it looked like in those kind of early days. And I love putting visuals to things and being able to sort of imagine ourselves there and what it looked like. And yeah, so I hope that's helpful. And if not, we got a picture book today in this big book study. So, all righty. So this couple has since become so fascinated that they have dedicated their home to the work. Many a distracted wife has visited this house to find loving and understanding companionship among women who knew her problem. And again, that's what we're talking a lot about in the chapter Two Wives, and even in the chapter Working with Others, and even where we left off last week, that idea that, man, it's not that in those early days, it wasn't just that I got well, that's wonderful. But if somebody wasn't open to the recovery process, they weren't open to the 12 steps, they would make an effort to bring the family into this way of living. And so that ability to help those who love those who suffer from this illness. And it says to hear from the lips of their husband what had happened to them, to be advised on how her own wayward mate might be hospitalized and approached when he next stumbled. Again, offering an answer to their problems, their deep problems, lack of control, lack of choice. It says, many a man yet dazed from his hospital experience has stepped over the threshold of that home into freedom. And if you guys have been coming to the study since step one, you might have a note in your book that says, see page 41, and maybe it's got a little smiley face. And the reason is because we're talking about Fred. And if you guys remember in Fred's story, we're kind of joking around like, oh, let's see if we can figure out what Fred's problem is. It's got to be a problem outside of Fred. It couldn't be a lack of control and lack of choice. It's got to be an out there problem. And, on page 41, we'd read like, oh, he's out of town. He'd been out of town before. Nothing wrong about that. Maybe his business didn't go well. Well, his business came off well. His partners would be pleased, and we're like, maybe there's clouds. It's got to be a cloudy day. Not a cloud on the horizon. And then we saw, once he stepped over that threshold, he had that thought. And we decided, we're like, that's it. He's got to avoid thresholds. That's our problem. If we just avoid thresholds, permanent sobriety is possible. And thank goodness, that our problem is not out here, that we don't need to control our environment. Oh, we're on page 160. Thank you for joining. 160, we're about halfway through the page, but I was jumping around referencing page 41. Thank goodness that we can cross thresholds into a new freedom. And that's what's on offer here in this way of life, in these 12 steps, with this solution. It's not I have to avoid, it's not I get to be small in life. No, I get to live and go anywhere on the firing lines of life, even thresholds into a new freedom. That was a real long joke that came to fruition. So thanks for sticking with me for that. It says many an alcoholic who entered there came away with an answer. Just what I want to remind us is we have a chapter called There is a Solution. What we have is an answer. And it's not a wishy-washy, maybe keep coming back. Who knows if it'll happen? Maybe something will rub off. What we have is a way to manufacture that spiritual awakening, that essential psychic change, a real solution. It says he succumbed to that gay crowd inside, who laughed at their own misfortune and understood his. And I don't know about you guys, but when I went to my first few meetings, those early days, I didn't like, I didn't like the people. I wasn't super jazzed to be there. I wasn't excited about it. But I could tell there's a happiness and a freedom that those people had, those members had, that I did not have. That ability to be free, to laugh at ourselves, and a deep understanding, right, of what our problem is. Impressed by those who visited him at the hospital, he capitulated entirely. When later in an upper room of his house, he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. And so what would happen, and what 12-step work looked like in those early days in Akron, Ohio, is they would find a prospect, find an alcoholic to work with, and they would try to get him hospitalized, and Sister Ignatia would help maybe fudge the papers to get him in the hospital, you know what I mean? And he would be detoxed, and they would show up. And what would they do? They would share their experience with the physical allergy. They would share their inability to control the amount they take. And they would share their experience with the mental obsession, often their experience of, hey man, I was just in this room time after time after time, and I would get drunk on the way home from the hospital. And he would say, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me. I went through that. Yeah, that's me. I drank that way. Yeah, that's me. I experienced that. And if you're looking, Sister Ignatia, right over Rob's shoulder, she's, I love her. We wouldn't have chips in our meetings if it wasn't for her, and we might not even have coffee. So, I mean, she's not a saint, but for us, she's practically a saint with that coffee. All right. And so they would show up and they would offer, a deep understanding, laying down the foundation of what step one is, laying down the foundation. And when the person in the bed was able to see their hopelessness, able to see, yeah, that's me, I'm going to drink again. I'm going to do this again. And I know that I don't want to. They would offer the solution. And that solution is that spiritual awakening. And they would explain, here's how we get it with the action of these 12 steps. I'll point out, hopeless, then hope. They're not going to be like, hey, we got a spiritual solution. Guy'd be like, no, thank you, just like I was, right? And what would happen is they would then bring him to the meeting. They would go upstairs in an upper room where he would likely get on his knees, Oxford group days, and say the third step prayer, or a version therein, and dedicate himself to this work. And so one of those things, I know we got a couple. Big book nerds? Do we got some big book nerds here at the Big Book Study today? Maybe just a few, right? And so some of the big book nerds, you guys might be pointing out, hey, that word surrender, or maybe this, for those that are maybe not the big book nerds, this is just a fun fact. The word surrender isn't in the book. It's not in the first 164 pages. But I will point out, capitulate is. Capitulate's just a fancy word for surrender. Yeah, that is just if you're wanting to be or needing to be pedantic. I've got you properly armed with facts to pedant, which I don't think is how you conjugate that even a little bit. But yeah, that's what they're doing. They're saying, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna live this way of life. I'm willing to take these steps. And I love that it talks about he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. See, at least in my experience, it's for me when I share my story, when I share my experience, strength, and hope, or when I'm just being asked to share at a meeting, I at a meeting level try to avoid. And I'm not saying this is right. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying this is what I do. I would encourage us all to have our own experience with it deeply. But I try not to share the war stories. When I talk about what it was like, I talk about my experience with the symptoms. I talk about my experience with the allergy. I talk about my experience with the obsession, that insane thought. And I talk about what it's like for me when I showed up and I was separated from substances, but also separated from God. And I experienced that pain and that emptiness and that loneliness, because for me, man, I thought that was a series of my andas and my yabas. But it's when we are one-on-one working with another person, that's when those war stories can be incredibly useful. When I'm able to match my experience with yours. Man, it's when I'm sitting with you and you're sharing about how you were homeless, that's when I'll tell you that I was homeless. That's when I'll share with you about my experience living on the streets. I mean, if you're talking about, no, things are still manageable. No, I still got this, still got that. I'll talk about my experience with the allergy and the obsession when things were still looking good on the outside, right? That's what I'm called to do, to see how I can be most helpful. And it says the expression on the faces of the woman, that indefinable something in the eyes of the men. And I just want to point out on page 9 in our book, Ebby Thatcher shows up on page 9 to meet Bill Wilson. He's been drinking gin. Ebby Thatcher shows up and he's fresh-skinned and glowing. And what does Bill notice? His eyes. There was something inexplicably different what had happened. And that's the thing. Oftentimes, when we're around here while we're working steps, we don't even got to guess what step people are on. You can almost tell. You know what I mean? When somebody's in that 4th column of resentments and that light comes on, and you wouldn't think the light would come on when I realize I'm a dickhead, but that seems to be the way it is, right? Yeah, the door opened. He stood there fresh-skinned and glowing. Now we can see it. Man, you can see what it's like after somebody made that amend. You know that amend. And it's like, not literally, but it's like they're floating, that weight is lifted. It's the most incredible thing. And it says the stimulating and electric atmosphere of the place. And isn't there, meetings won't keep somebody like me sober. But man, there's something incredible that does happen at these meetings. You can feel it. It's palpable. And it talks about all of that, all of those things, the expressions, the light, the atmosphere, all of that conspired, that idea of working together to let him know that here was haven at last. And haven is a safe place. But in the original manuscript, it would have said heaven. But when they were having it edited before sending the book out, there were some people that were like, hey, some religious people are going to be like, heaven cannot be here because heaven is over there. So they changed it not to upset anyone. But that's that idea that here is that place of profound peace. And I tell you, who of us wouldn't, I know I didn't expect it to find it in church basements, community halls, or in the Zoom Hollywood squares, but here it is. And it says, and this next bottom paragraph with page 160. There's something about it that it's really what at least I feel, because I can't tell you what to do. And heaven knows I can't tell other home group members what to do, and barely, tell a sponsee what to do. Heck, I can't even do that. I can just show them what I've done. But this is the call for me, how I am called to show up to meetings, how I'm called to show up to newcomers, how I am called to show up to people who are suffering and struggling in and outside of the rooms. Welcome, we're on the bottom of page 160. It says the very practical approach to his problems. Practical approach to his problem. The absence of intolerance of any kind. The informality, and I got that down pat, you guys. I'm here for the informality. But the genuine democracy, that idea that we're truly all equal, the uncanny understanding which these people had were irresistible. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, and it comes in the chapter, There's a Solution, that my job isn't to shout at anyone. I know I get a little enthusiastic, but I'm not shouting at anyone. My job is to live in such a way that my deportment shouts, that how I carry myself, that the light that is on in my eyes, that is what shouts that there is a real answer. That's what I'm called to do. How I live, not what I say. And it really helps when those things do match up. It says he and his wife would leave elated by the thought, not by the thought that their problems were solved, not by the thought that things were going to go good for them, not the thought that their financial problems would leave, but by the thought of what they could now do for some stricken acquaintance and his family. The thought of what we could do for others. Man, it really sounds like this whole helping others is a mandatory thing. I joke a lot that it's not top tier extra credit. It's the main curriculum. It says they knew they had a host of new friends. It seemed that they had known these strangers always, and goodness, doesn't that happen? I'm off on a tangent, but I go on those a lot. One of my most often ignored suggestions to sponsees is when you're out of town, go to a meeting. And part of why is because, man, there is almost an instant connection. And I have had incredible experiences going to meetings when I'm out of town. And it really is, man, it feels like we've known each other always. And how quickly those bonds form, because not just the common problem, but the common solution and the common program of action and this common language and understanding. And we're pointing in the same direction. So it says they had seen miracles, and one was to come to them. And one of the things I want to point out is when it talks about, I think, hold on, we got this thing in the chat. Yeah, there are some amazing meetings out there. And actually, I think one of our Calgary members and one of our Thailand members might have met when the Calgary member was in Thailand. And that's kind of the coolest thing, is like we can go around the world, instant connections. And I love the Zoom era for that, like sponsoring and working with people around the world, connecting with people around the world. Absolutely practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail, and that's on page 89. That's kicking off the chapter working with others, which again is a chapter dedicated to working with others. And so, yeah, if you're doing any traveling, I would gently encourage, check out a meeting but maybe do it to prove me wrong. Because if I make it as a suggestion, everyone's going to ignore me. Do it to be like, no, Paige, I went to a meeting out of town and it sucked. It probably won't suck. It'll probably be a great experience. Okay. They had seen miracles, and one was to come to them. And the most important thing I want to point out about this is it talks about in the forward to the second edition that a wholesale miracle has taken place. See, miracles are those things that we kind of expect to be like a shot of lightning, a 1 in a million, winning the lottery sort of deals. But here in the Runes of 12 Step, these miracles happen on wholesale, right? They happen like we've come to expect miracles. And honestly, when I'm approaching this book, approaching this work, come and expect a miracle, because that is what is on offer, a miracle. And it says they had vision, the capital G, capital R, great reality. And their capital A, capital P, capital C, all powerful creator. And one of the things that, man, in this book, when we see capitalizations, oftentimes what we're doing is we're talking about, It's been chaotic. I had a call that was coming and I had to try to hang up. Everything's going great. It's smooth sailing over here. All right. So, but when we talk about the great reality, capital G, capital R, it's a synonym, a word that stands in place for God. And the first time we saw capital G, capital R, great reality, we were seeing it in the chapter We Agnostics, and we're talking about maybe just hoping to vision that great reality. And then we start to experience it in step 5. We're on the broad highway. And now so when we start on this process, we begin to get a little vision of that great reality. When we experience a spiritual awakening, we're with that great reality. We're connected to that all-powerful creator. We're having an experience. That thing that starts in step 2 as just an idea, we begin to experience as we work these steps. And then what happens? We get to help others. And that's incredible. Anywho, so it says their house will hardly accommodate its weekly visitors for the number 60 or 80 as a rule. And what I want to point out is that 60 or 80 in that tiny room, 60 or 80 is standing room only, right? Standing room only is what I'd imagine. And again, that they are all smoking. Probably. So the air quality, we were kind of joking about the air quality, it's not good in there. It's not good. So it says alcoholics are being attracted from far and near. Now imagine in the early 1930s, you hear about this Alcoholics Anonymous, you hear about this solution. I mean, they're driving from nearby communities, from Cleveland, to make it to Akron, Ohio, to make this meeting. You didn't miss a meeting, right? Which kind of tells us the privilege that we have to be able to Zoom. I mean, there are 24/7 meetings on Zoom. There's marathon meetings, over the holidays. There's meetings in many communities every night of the week, multiple days of the week. And it's just a reminder that, being able to make a meeting truly is a privilege. And it came as a result of one alcoholic helping another, and these original co-founders, and their work allows us to be here today. And so it says, from surrounding towns, families drive long distances to be present. A community 30 miles away, that's Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah, that's Clarence. So if Clarence started in Cleveland, you could look over Rob's shoulder. That's Clarence. He was a bit of a prickly customer from what I heard, bit of a challenging personality, and always like to make the joke about the jerks in our home group that are some prickly personalities, right? Turns out I'm the joke. Fun fact, we got somebody who got their first tattoo in Cleveland. Yeah, we'll check on your tattoo after the meeting. And also for those that just joined, I absolutely do interact with the chat, which sometimes takes us on tangents and unexpected places, but I know I wouldn't have it any other way. All right. All right, so Cleveland, it's got 15 fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Being a large place, we think someday its fellowship will number many hundreds. And I think if we were to, if we're all to go on a trip to Cleveland, I know that's a lot farther for some of us than it is others. We'd see there's probably several, thousands of members in Cleveland. I'd imagine they probably have hundreds of meetings, right? And that vision has begun to come true. So it says, but life among Alcoholics Anonymous is more than, which means it is these things too, just in case we're wondering. It's more than, but also these things: attending gatherings and visiting hospitals, cleaning up old scrapes and helping to settle family differences, explaining the disinherited son to his irate parents. The disinherited is the, kicked out son, and irate is the angry and really, because goodness, they don't know, frustrated parents. Lending money Real heavy asterisks on that. Really not a recommend on that one. Just real heavy, do not recommend. And securing jobs for each other. And then here's the asterisk that the book gives: when justified. These are everyday occurrences. No one, and this is important, no one here at the meeting today, no one here listening, no one is too discredited or has sunk too low to be welcomed cordially. That cordial is that warm, friendly, polite welcome, if he means business. Again, man, if somebody's wanting to do this thing, we can go far. But if somebody doesn't want it, there's not much any of us can do. The social distinctions, petty rivalries, and jealousies, these are laughed out of countenance. They're just left away. And this, being wrecked in the same vessel, being restored and united under one God, with hearts and minds attuned to the welfare of others, the things which matter so much to some people no longer signify much to them. How could they? And that ties in so beautifully with page 17. And on page 17 of our book, it's that metaphor of the Titanic, that common problem, that, rescued from shipwreck, right? Wrecked under the same vessel, that we were wrecked under the same illness, but we were restored by our common solution. That's what it means to be united under one God, because of course we all have different conceptions and perceptions and understandings and lack of understanding, but that common solution of a spiritual awakening and that common program of action, the 12 steps. Oh, is that the Titanic? So no, I was like, I don't think it sunk like that. That looks a little lopsided. That looks what happens when I am unrecovered and I think I am the captain of my ship. Gets a little bottom heavy, gets a little topsy-turvy. So just, if you're wondering why I ought not be the captain, you look over Rob's shoulder and you'll see that little boat. Woo! And so, yeah, and I just love that. I love that beautiful little tie-in, not my fun little metaphor, but the beautiful tie-in with the Titanic and the Titanic disaster on page 17 and page 161. Under only slightly different conditions, the same thing is taking place in many Western cities or Eastern cities. So Eastern, literally the opposite word. So talking about New York. In one of these, there is a well-known hospital for the treatment of alcoholic and drug addiction. What we're talking about is the Towns Hospital in New York City. And if you've been with us a while, you would have heard quite a lot about that. It says 6 years ago, one of our number was a patient there, Bill Wilson. That's who we're talking about. It's always like who's who, right? So this is Bill Wilson. That's who we're talking about. And it says many of us have felt for the first time the capital P presence and capital P power of God within its walls. And I didn't get all the pictures of all the places. I thought 76 Palisades Drive was good enough, and then I gave up. So if you look over Rob's shoulder, you'll see the Towns Hospital in New York City. And that's where Bill Wilson went. And heck, we'll do a little bit of history, even though I'm getting short on time. He goes there for the first time in the summer of 1933. And he learns about the allergy, and he learns about the obsession, and he drinks again. And he goes back to the Towns Hospital summer of 1934, and he learns that he is going to die of alcoholism. So that first time he had self-knowledge and he drank again. The second time he's got self-knowledge and he's got fear of his impending death, and he drinks again. And in between his second and third hospitalization, a friend of ours, Hebby Thatcher, shows up and carries the message of what the solution is, the spiritual awakening and the program of action, what later becomes our 12 steps. And Bill Wilson goes to the Towns Hospital for the third time, much to Lois Wilson's chagrin. She was not happy about this. She knew he was hopeless. She's like, who's going to pay this bill? You know what I mean? But he goes to the hospital, and what was different was he worked the steps. And in those walls, he had a powerful spiritual experience, a powerful spiritual awakening. Oh, yeah, I had it at summer. So, yeah. But yeah, if you want to see the dates, check out the chat. If I try to read them, I'll just trip over my brain and my words. Walking is not my forte. Mental walking, also not my forte. That is very funny to only a few people here who, anywho, focus. All right. And what I wanted to point out is the capital P, presence and power of God. And I just love that idea of God as a present tense verb, God in the here and now, God working and active in the here and now. And it says we're greatly indebted to the doctor in attendance there. That's Silkworth. That's Dr. Silkworth. That's the guy who wrote the 2 letters in the doctor's opinion, our homie, Dr. Silkworth. It's okay if you don't call him your homie. That's reasonable. But my homie, he doesn't know that we're friends. He's passed on many years. I'm just making weird jokes. Anywho, it says we are greatly indebted to the doctor in attendance there. For he, although it might prejudice his own work, has told us of his belief in ours. And you can see Dr. Silkworth over Rob's shoulder. And man, like that's the thing with Dr. Silkworth. His belief in ours, his champion for us, even though, you know, could cost him money, even though it could cost him his reputation in the field. And also, you know who does, there's a gentleman by the name of Charles Towns, and he's the guy who owned the Towns Hospital. And he doesn't get any credit, so I'm just going to give him some credit. Silkworth, rightly so, gets a lot of credit. But if it wasn't for Charles Towns, this book also wouldn't have been written. And he was a big champion for Alcoholics Anonymous and for the book. And yeah, he was kind of hoping Bill would move in and he could make some money. Oh yeah, we got a question. Yeah, in my, how I like to, so the question is, do capital letter, well, why can't I read today? Do the capital letters represent the divine? And not always, but by and large, yes. By and large, those capital letters are, at least for me, are synonyms, words that mean the same as God or higher power, whatever word that you use. And it's just another way of saying that. And so that's what we're pointing to. And also, if you're like, man, that word God, it makes me bristle with antagonism. If we don't like that word, another way to say that, feel free to use any of those words that are capitalized, because I believe that's what we're pointing to. Not with all of them, but at least in my experience, most of them are things that, yeah, could be the divine, could be God, could be our higher power. Absolutely. So every few days, this Dr. Silkworth, suggests our approach to one of his patients. Understanding our work, he can do this with an eye to selecting those who are willing and able to recover on a spiritual basis. Basis as in way of life, right? Many of us former patients go there to help, go there to 12-step, go there to work with others. They don't go there to feel good about themselves and be like, look how sober I am. No, going with the purpose of how can I help someone else? Then in this Eastern city, there are informal meetings. Again, Eastern City is New York City. Informal meetings. Poor Lois. She was probably, you know, cooking up the dinner and making the coffee for them. The informal meetings such as we have described to you, where you may now see scores of members. There are the same fast friendships, and there's the same helpfulness to one another as you find among our Western friends. Those Western friends are Akron, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio. It says there's a good bit of travel between East and West, and we foresee a great increase in this helpful interchange. So those early members would go back and forth to try to stay connected. And it says someday we hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find a capital F fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. And that little quote, and a little bit later in the paragraph as well, is referenced in the forward to the second edition. If you're interested in what page, it's page XV. You can just make that as a little note. We won't pop there today, but to some extent, this is already true. Some of us are salesmen and go about. Little clusters of 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. through contact with our two larger centers. Those who travel drop in as often as we can. Hey, going to meetings when you're out of town is a great idea. I didn't mean to tie that in. That's just me being difficult. This practice enables us to lend a hand to be helpful, and that's listed first. And at the same time, avoid certain alluring distractions of the road about which any traveling man can inform you. And it says, thus we grow. And when it says, thus we grow, keep in mind, thus we grow, one alcoholic working with another, carrying this message out of this book. And it says, and so can you. Though you be but one man, one person with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. One human being with this book. And that's why we do things like big book studies. And when I work with sponsees, that's why I like to take them through the book, because it contains all that I need. The directions and the diagnostic criteria, all that I need. And it says, we know what you are thinking. And goodness, I love this, because so many times throughout this study, we talk about how the book meets us where we're at and takes us where we need to go. How often have we been, nudged into sponsorship by our sponsors and thought, man, exactly this. I can't do that. It says, we know what you are thinking. You are saying to yourself, I'm jittery and alone. I couldn't do that. At least I know I work with a lot of people who have asked me to sponsor them because they didn't know how to sponsor others. They didn't feel comfortable in sponsoring others. I couldn't do that. And it says, but you can. Meeting us where we're at and taking us where we need to go, but you can. You forget that you have just now tapped a source of power much greater than yourself. To duplicate with such backing what we have accomplished is only a matter of willingness, patience, and labor. Happy, joyous, and free get a whole lot of play, but I think of maybe not equal importance, because how else do I get happy, joyous, and free? Working with others is willingness, patience, and labor. The willingness to work with others, actively doing this. And again, this chapter is about one alcoholic, one member carrying this message to another and having them work with others, and so on and so forth. It says, we know of an AA member who is living in a large community. Now who I got for this is likely Bill Rettel. And okay, well, I'll tell you who I have, and I'll tell you who Rob's got. I've got it as likely Bill Rettel in Hackettstown, New Jersey. Who do you got? Who do you got? Waiting for is it in the chat? Not yet, no worries. I'll read it when it's in, I'll read it. He had lived there but a few weeks when he found that the place probably contained more alcoholics per square mile than any city in the country. Oh, you know this, Hank? Oh, maybe also New Jersey? Anywho, Montclair, New Jersey. Interesting. Well, either or, it's somewhere in New Jersey. So we'll just take away New Jersey, whether it's Hank or Bill Rettel. And actually, regardless, I mean, the fact that I'm referencing Bill Rettel tells us why we had to change the stories in the book, right? So many Bills, so many Bobs, throw in a Hank or two, give us an Ernie on the side. You know what I mean? We had to diversify the stories a little. All right. So this was only a few days ago at this writing, which was in 1939. Authorities were much concerned, and he got in touch with a prominent psychiatrist who had undertaken certain responsibilities for the mental health of the community. The doctor proved to be able and exceedingly anxious to adopt any workable method of handling the situation. So I inquired, what did our friend have on the ball? Oh, and so you've got, for the chief psychiatrist is Dr. Russell E. Oh man, Blaisdell. I don't know if I pronounced it right. I probably didn't. So our friend proceeded to tell him, and with such good effect that the doctor agreed to attest among his patients and certain other alcoholics from a clinic which he attends. And here's the thing. So when I talk about how, for me, this is Bill Ruddle, I kind of pick on Hank because I'm like, this guy's got to be a much better communicator than Hank, because we saw Hank's writings in Two Employers, where he would work with this guy, this big bank guy, for like 2 hours and got nowhere. And this other guy, he worked with him for hours, got nowhere. And I'm like, we should have sent in Bill Ruddle, but maybe this could be Hank's redemption arc, from the Two Employers to Vision for You. So that's a fun tie-in for the real big book nerds. And I'm so sorry for anyone else. Bill, well, anywho, we'll fight out the Bill Hank argument in the chat. I have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even Hank and Bill. Anywho, so it says, arrangements were also made with the chief psychiatrist of a large public hospital to select still others from the stream of misery which flows through that institution. And one of the things, as those of you guys who come here know, I like bouncing around. Like I love tying in different parts of the book. And on page 28, it talks about how what at first seems a flimsy reed has proven to be a loving and powerful hand of God. And I just love that idea that the stream of misery that we were once in, we now get to be a part of that flimsy reed, extending our hands out to those who are drowning, who are dying of this illness, and be a part of that turning into that hand of God. What an incredible way of life. It says, so our fellow worker will soon have friends galore. Galore. I need to use that more in just casual conversation. History facts galore. Maybe not. Some of them may sink and perhaps never get up. But if our experience is a criterion, so if our experience, is a demonstration, or if our experience proves to be a demonstration, more than half of those approached will become future fellows, or will become fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we saw those statistics in the forwards, and where we'll start again next week in the forwards, where about half and up to 70%, right? It says, when a few men in the city have found themselves and discovered the joy of helping others to face life again, and truly, really, it is a joy. There will be no stopping until everyone in that town has had the opportunity to recover if he can and will. And that's my responsibility. And so still you may say, again, the book meeting us where we're at and taking us where we need to go. But I will not have the benefit of contact with you who write this book. And those who have written this book have long since passed on. But I just love this line. It says, we cannot be sure. God will determine that. So you must remember that your real reliance is always upon him. And before the meeting, we were talking about, not putting sponsors up on a pedestal. We're not reliant upon human power. We're reliant upon that power which we find as the result of these 12 steps. A higher power, a God, a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe. I'm throwing out some of those, the divine, some of those synonyms. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. And now these last two paragraphs, they might be real familiar for everyone in the meeting, or maybe not. Often meetings wrap up with these two paragraphs, which is a beautiful way to wrap up a meeting. And I know of some members of Alcoholics Anonymous who wanted this to be read at their funeral, because it's a beautiful way to kind of sum things up. So just kind of a poignant 2 paragraphs to end on. It says our book is meant to be suggestive only. I want to point out, though, that we don't have alternative suggestions if we don't like the suggestions. You know what I'm saying? We don't have a plan B for suggestions. We're not saying you have to. We're just saying this is what has worked for us. So it says God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. And so this is not just a direction, but it's a prayer. Because anytime in this book it says we ask, or to ask, it says ask him. So let's ask God in our morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. So that is a prayer. God, what can I do each day for the man who is still sick? And also, you know what's annoying? It heavily implies that we have a morning meditation practice to take this prayer into. And so that's what we're doing. We're bringing this into that quiet time with God in the mornings. And it's a beautiful direction. It says, the answers will come. That is a promise. The answer will come. All the promises got some fine print. This is the fine print, the little asterisk, if your own house is in order, right? For those who've been coming, y'all know about the spiritual hoarder's house that I got. I got to make sure that house is clean. And it says, but obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. And one of the things, I thought there were paradoxes all over this 12-step thing, because, when I would hear, to keep it, you got to give it away, or you got to give it away to keep it. And I want you to know, I would hear people say that again and again and again. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? What are you on about? It made no sense to me. And I got sort of what they were pointing at, which is go help others. But the reason is it didn't make sense to me is because I didn't have it. My own house was not in order. I could not transmit that which I did not have. And you know what I found is there's not really paradoxes. There are things that I cannot intellectualize my way to. I've got to experience. I can only experience. So if you come up across a paradox like I did, it's possible. I can't think my way there. I have to experience it. And how do I experience it? I work the steps out of this book, like my life depends on it, because it does. And it says, the answers will come if your own house is in order, but obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. So see to it that your relationship with him is right. And this is just me. I come to spirituality with a real relational view. If I'm not, putting effort into a relationship and talking and listening, we're not spending time together, we're not going to feel very connected. I've got to put in effort for there to be a relationship. So that's just kind of the view that I have, or the lens that I take. So, and it says, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. Countless others. This is the capital G, capital A, capital G, capital F. Great fact for us. And on page 25, it references that great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences, which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. That is the great capital G, capital F, great fact. The God, the higher power, the creator, the spirit of the universe, the change that has happened to us, the solution is a great fact for us. And then it says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Hey, where did we talk about abandoning ourselves to God? Hey, that sounded like the third step, right? Where we made that decision to abandon, and we had that sneaky little prayer and how it works. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. So that sounds like a third step decision, followed up by some action, because that's what we do. And it says, admit your faults to him and to your fellows. That sounds like a fifth step to me, doesn't it? Yeah. And then it says, clear away the wreckage of your past. That sounds like step 9, going out, setting right my wrongs, making amends. And it says, give freely of what you find. That sounds like 12-step work to me. And what you find, and join us. Join us. We shall be with you in the capital F, capital S, fellowship of the Spirit. And what I want to point out is in 12 steps, there's 2 fellowships. There's the fellowship, and then there's the fellowship of the Spirit. And the bar for entry into the fellowship, it depends which fellowship, right? So if it's Alcoholics Anonymous, it's problem with alcohol and a desire to stop drinking. That is the bar. Long form of the third tradition. That is the bar. Super, super low. There's a bit of and I don't want to say a barrier or a bar, but more is required if I want to experience the capital F fellowship of the capital S Spirit. It's available to everyone, absolutely everyone. But how do I experience that fellowship? Actively working the 12 steps. That's what I got to do. And it's, by the way, I want to be very clear. I'm not, just because I experienced the fellowship of the Spirit, that doesn't make me any better than people who aren't working the steps. Anyone who's hasn't had this experience, anyone who's just coming to meetings, I'm not better than them. But just that there are two fellowships, and at least for me, I want to be a part of them both. I don't want to miss out on everything that this thing has to offer. And I was super miserable when I was only part of the fellowship and just going to meetings. I was not happy to be around. It was not radiant joy. So the fellowship of the Spirit is better for me, and it's probably better for you guys too. So though by you guys, I mean those that got to deal with me. It was not a peach. Okay. So, and it says, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge. And for years, I had this friend, and he would always talk about how trudge means walk with purpose. Well, I looked that up in my 1930s dictionary, and it's travel on foot, like especially with labor and fatigue. So this is work. This is a way of life. But to tie in what I always hear when I see the word trudge, we've got a purpose. We're doing, this is work, but it is with purpose. And you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the capital R, capital H, capital D, road of happy destiny. Oh man, it's not a destination. It's a way. It's a road. There's not an end point. Sounds like I got to keep doing this. Oh man. And it says, may God bless you and keep you until then. And we'll wrap up there. And I just want to end. We'll start again next week. I just want to express my gratitude, because I don't think you guys could, maybe you do, but like to understand how much it means to me to be able to do this and to be able to have people come back each week. And it's truly a privilege for me. And it's the highlight of my life to be able to do things like this. And it means so much. So I want to thank you guys. So thank you for coming, and thank you for listening, and we'll kick it off again next week. So we'll stop the recording.